Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. In this episode, I take you on the journey that led us to highly profitable, scalable live event businesses. When did it become okay to lose money? I mean, somewhere along the line, somewhere in our careers, it became acceptable. Heck, it was even fashionable to lose money. Maybe on a month, maybe on a year, often on a job. You know, the journey of scalability, why has it taken me 40 years? And I've written about this, you can read the blog post again to get some of the details of this, but let me take you back to where I was 40 years ago when I discovered this business and found out that there was a thing like rental and how absolutely cool it was. And I'm out there, I'm working on a gig. I'm doing AV technician stuff for $10 an hour. And it's like, oh, great. I got a 4-hour minimum. I made $40 today. If I do that 5 times a week, I can pay rent. Pretty simple life. Very exciting. You're young. You don't have a lot of expenses. You can do all that stuff. But then I'd see the gear come out and it was old. It was beat up. It wasn't very sophisticated. But then sometimes other gear would come in. Like, I haven't seen this before. Where's this sound system come from? Well, this sound system belongs to a guy who works at the company who hired me, who rented it to them because they were out of sound systems. And so I learned about sub-rental. And then one day I saw a video projector, and the video projectors we were using back in the day were archaic. I mean, they were real dinosaurs and they were super finicky and difficult. And here was this fancy new video projector that the guy came in and set up in about 15 minutes instead of the 2 to 3 hours I was seeing on some of these older projectors. And this is slick. And it's like, well, he owned those projectors, but the company didn't own them. So the company that was hiring me didn't have these nice projectors. They were renting them from somebody else. And so this guy, who's just another guy like me, he's not out there making $10 an hour. He's getting $500 a day for these video projectors that he owns. And he's dropping them off, setting them up, leaving, and coming back at the end of the gig and picking them up again. How do I get in on that? So it was immediately fascinating to see the idea of rental where people would buy a piece of equipment, rent it to someone else. They would use it, right? It'd leave your hands and go to someone else. They would take all the responsibility for using it, making it valuable. And then they'd give it back to you with a check. I mean, how awesome is this? So I looked into that. My first business plan, sitting down at a computer and figuring out what it would take to run a business and doing the cash flow analyses and all that kind of stuff. 40 years ago, literally 40 years ago, yes, we had computers back then, thank you, was based on a rental model. I wanted to buy gear, and I found, some other guys that I worked with that thought that was a great idea too, and we were all interested and really fascinated by this idea of equipment making money for us. And so we wanted to buy gear. And I looked at the type of equipment I wanted to buy and found out pricing, took estimates of how often it would rent, did cash flow projections, figured out how I would service the debt because I learned about debt and leasing and all that kind of stuff. And it was just fascinating. I mean, it was like, this would be really, really cool to do. But there was a huge leap of faith there. There was a capital investment involved, and then there was what happens if somebody doesn't rent it? What happens if we have a slow month and I still have debt to pay or lease payments to make? And that was scary. That was like, that's enough deterrent right there. But you know what? If demand is high, wouldn't my customers go out and buy that equipment for themselves? So I thought all of this through and probably I chickened out. Maybe my life would have been different if I'd taken that plunge. So the fear of losing money kept me from doing it. Now, I deal with business owners all the time who lose money on a regular basis, and I don't get the same sense of fear that they have that, oh yeah, we always lose money in July is what they say. It's like, well, that's just terrifying. What can we do about that? Oh, we don't need to do anything about it. We looked at doing festivals in the summer. We don't want to do festivals. We'll just keep our costs down and do shorter weeks and, maybe let people take vacation during the summer, encourage that. And they've rationalized their way out of it. And as I looked at these companies, I found out that, it wasn't just July. It was also December and sometimes February and maybe 2 or 3 other months where they didn't lose money as bad as they did in their slowest month, but they were still losing money. Okay, what is going on here? Well, fast forward, because let's get out of the past here. Well, let's go to the recent past, right? Fast forward. I call it the day the music died, March 17th, 2020. This is my generation's, the live event the day our music died was when we realized that the pandemic was going to smack us down hard. I remember giving that webinar, my first pandemic webinar, March 17th, and saying, guys, this is a lot worse than it looks. You're not looking at 2-week shutdowns. You're looking at not doing any business probably for the next 3 or 4 months. And as the weeks wore on, it went to, 12 months and 18 months. And I finally said, guys, don't plan on anything being normal until 2023. Now, what are we going to do instead? And we worked on figuring out what the new normal or the next normal was going to be during that era. March 17th, 2020, the jig was up, the gig was up, our innocence was suddenly lost, and many of us wouldn't realize that for some time. But what had happened was it exposed the pandemic, which I will still argue is the best thing that's ever happened to our industry because it was a wake-up call. Most of us survived. It was painful. I feel for everybody who lost, jobs and opportunities and incomes and lives were disrupted as mine was. But the fact of the matter is what we learned from that puts us in a much better position to be successful going forward as long as we don't lose what we learned. And what the pandemic taught us, that our business model was fundamentally flawed. And when we're not just losing money for a month, when we're losing money for a year because our business model is flawed, you see that coming, you make some changes fast and you start rethinking some things, right? So that forced downsizing meant we had to understand what I called the agency model, because even though we may have gone from our 60 employees down to 5 employees or even less, we still had shows to do. They might have been virtual shows or streaming events. They may have been, drive-through graduations, which is mind-boggling. We'll talk about that, in years to come when people won't believe that graduates actually drove up to the stage. Their parents dropped them off. The kid walked across the stage, got back in the car. It was like a drive-in theater. I mean, people won't believe those stories. It'll be those things we'll see in the film clips about our era, what happened during the pandemic. We were running much smaller companies. And so if we got a gig, it's like, well, we can call up our old employees and have them come in for a day and help us work on that job. They're not doing anything anyway. Thank goodness for government subsidies for helping us get through that. So that was the agency model. You sell something, you plan it, and then when it's time to execute it, you gather the resources and you go out and do it. It was very much like being a startup. When you first started up your business and it's just you and, that equipment you bought and that, your cousin who's going to be your driver warehouse person that you brought into the business, your first employee. That's what you did, right? You set up everything you could yourself, but as soon as you had 2 jobs or you needed to get a proposal out, you had to hire somebody else to do it. You were running an agency model. And then one day you said, well, wait a minute, I'm too busy to go find somebody else. I'm just going to hire somebody full time, and then I don't have to hunt for anyone. And then that steamrolled and it grew into a business where you had, 60 employees and you're dealing with, personnel headaches and still having all the problems that you had when you had just 5 employees. So here we are. We're back at this era. We're making the agency model work through the pandemic. And then people started asking me, and this is what really got me thinking, is when do I bring my employees back? When do I restore the model that ruined my life is what I was hearing. But it was the fair question, right? Yeah, business has gotten better. We're doing more stuff. Why wouldn't you go back to that model where we bring people in and we have those resources at our beck and call? And so I asked an owner one time, I said, well, wait a minute, can't you just hire these people as a freelancer? Well, yeah, but they want full-time work. And I said, well, you don't have full-time work. I mean, you didn't have full-time work before the pandemic. You had 4 months that you lost money and you paid people anyway. It's like, you don't have full-time work. Why don't you just, hire people on a contract basis? Well, what if they're not available? Why don't you hire somebody else? Why don't you have a deeper bench? Why don't you engage them sooner in the project? Because you have a lot of planning and preparation for a job, not just the on-site portion that needs handling. Why can't you hand them off and bring them on as a project manager or a lead? Well, then I won't make any money. I said, wait a minute, what are you charging? So we started going through all this analysis of basically rebuilding companies from that, but we're also fighting the gravity and the energy of how we've done it in the past, because that lure is strong. But by focusing on the agency model, trying to make this runway, this cash flow runway that we all needed to maintain, especially during 2020 and early 2021, we needed our cash to go as far as possible. And the way to do that was avoid any obligations that weren't directly related to making money. And what owners had to come to grips with is that their job cost, the cost of putting on a job, was going to increase. I mean, it was very, very simple. I couldn't bring somebody in who I was paying $25 an hour before the pandemic and bring them in on a part-time basis for $25 an hour. I was going to have to pay them $40 an hour, which was going to make my job costs look worse if I was charging the same thing. So why don't you charge more? Oh, customers won't pay for that. Well, lucky us. Again, another great thing about the pandemic was our customer channel blew up. We were selling to different people. We were selling to, the event planning industry was obviously, the hospitality industry was also devastated. A lot of those people were, taking on other jobs, other careers, taking a reset. So we were dealing with buyers who weren't used to dealing with people who sold on price. And they were coming in and saying, in a panic, saying, I don't know how to get this done. Can you do this for me? What's it going to cost? Hallelujah. This is what we've been waiting for. So let's start selling conscious of our cost basis. If our cost basis, in my example, has gone up from $25 an hour replacement cost for a technician to $40 an hour replacement cost for a technician, that's our cost, $40 an hour. If I can buy for less, yay for me. If I have to pay more, maybe my replacement cost is higher. I put margin on top of that. I should make money. And I can consistently make money if I sell that way. Well, how do I pay for all that gear that's sitting on my shelf? Well, first of all, that's a sunk cost. You've already invested in that. If you still owe money on it, we've got to generate some gross profit to cover that, to pay for that. But no job is going to pay for your past debt. It's only going to generate gross profit that will contribute to your overhead. And if you've got money left over, that's cash that you can use to pay down your debt. And that's how the game is played. But no single job is going to fix your balance sheet. So yeah, we still have that problem, but all the more reason we need to figure out how to say yes to jobs, how to staff them, plan them, crew them, and execute them profitably, and then do the next one, right? it's like being a startup again, which sounds a little exhausting, but let's face it, nothing about the past 3 years has not been exhausting. So, this became par for the course. Let's run our business smarter. And when live events come back, we'll reassess and see when it makes sense to start bringing some people back, which thankfully gave me more time to think about it and to work with some of my clients to say, hey, what are we going to do when live events come back and how are we going to make that work? So our next normal, pandemic into next normal was streaming, virtual events, high school graduations. That forced downsizing made us understand the agency model and pricing and selling a little bit better. We had to shift our value proposition from reselling assets, my beloved rental, and providing people and equipment for a fee, to delivering a service, okay, which was a successful streaming event, which took 6 to 12 weeks of planning, pre-production, recordings and editing, platform building, programming, website development before we could execute. Very, very different value proposition, a very different type of show for us. It took a while before we understood that we would never need to bring back those full-time employees. Fear, risk, and reality. Those things came together. It kind of gave us pause to say, wait a minute, maybe we're on to something here. So scalability, this is not a new idea, right? Scalable means to be profitable at any revenue level. Okay. When is it okay to lose money? Okay. Scalability says it's never okay to lose money, but we don't live in an ideal world, right? We don't live without any imperfections at all. There are times where we're going to lose money in a micro setting and a micro measurement, but in the aggregate, we're going to make some money. The reason we had drifted so far from scalable solutions in the first place had to do with the magic of a rental, and we can't deny this. It's hard to kill a rental-based business. So as rental-based businesses came back into demand, particularly in the second half of 2021, as live events opened back up again, it was easier to get together in person. There was pent-up demand. It lasted all the way through 2022. Fantastic. Wonderful. But we were still alive because it's really hard to kill a rental-based business. The only thing that can kill a rental-based business is oversaturation of the marketplace, which we were well on our way to doing, when there are so many choices that buying on price is the only thing that customers have to do, and eventually it'll force margins down so that people just drop out. People go bankrupt. They have 6 unprofitable months a year instead of 4. They can't sustain. They can't pay themselves. They go out of business. And we were certainly on the brink of that in 2018, 2019. Matter of fact, the most common story I hear from business owners today in 2023 is that in 2018, they had the best year they ever had, highest revenue, profit was okay. 2019, they had even higher revenue, they had even lower profit. So the more revenue these companies were generating, and I've watched this pattern since, 2010, the more revenue, the smaller their profit get. It was the opposite of scalable. These were unscalable organizations, and their solution was always to get more revenue and sell their way out of it, which worked because in a given month, having a windfall job make that month look more profitable, but it didn't make up for the fact that all the other months were not contributing enough to profit. So somewhere along the line, we got comfortable losing money and relying on windfalls and outlier months to solve our problems for us and kick the can down the road, buy some more gear, hire some more employees, do more job costing, and hope that it gets better. We had to get over a lot of things to make this agency model work. Okay. Once people started to realize how much money they were making in the streaming, I remember, and oh, really, probably August, September of 2020, clients were coming to me as going, I can't believe how much money we're making on these streaming events. And what they were finding is that they could double and triple their price each time they did an event, and they were still getting that money. The client was still happy, and they were just making more money, and their costs weren't going up. That they'd found a new way to make money, and they were using their gear, and all of a sudden they didn't care about the gear that was sitting on the shelf. All they cared about was the gear that was working, and they were buying new gear to do streaming events, specialized equipment, which wasn't horribly expensive, but it was working, sometimes every day. It was working 7 days a week. Their studios were booked up, lots and lots of events. And it's like, how do I keep making money like this? When the pandemic's over, I want to keep making money like this. I said, great, let's figure out how to do that. So we figured it out, right? We figured out that we could maintain a very low overhead, keep enough staff to sell, to find and sell the business, right? To do the sales and marketing, to win business, to plan the jobs that we had sold, because what we basically sell is planning. Our ability to plan an event, whether it's virtual or in person or hybrid, is our value proposition. We plan stuff. So we need to plan that. And then we need to procure. We need to buy. We need to hire. We need to outsource. Okay. Before the pandemic, we'd just go to the bench and we'd walk over and we'd find the guys who were sitting around in the warehouse looking at their phone and saying, hey, I need you to go out and do a show. Because they were cheap, right? And they weren't doing anything, so we needed to use them. But all of a sudden, those people aren't there. And we're actually hiring freelancers now, to come in and, help prep the show in the warehouse. How awesome is that? And then when they're done, they go out and do the show. They come back, they de-prep it, they put it all up, and they go home. How cool is this? And we were finding people who want to do that. And we were finding, warehouse managers who can manage outside crews, and we're prepping or planning and scrubbing shows better. And we're packaging them better to make the warehouse operations work better. This is all working. So all of a sudden, I've got clients who, had 60, 70 employees before the pandemic and were losing money. And now they're doing the same amount of revenue with 20 or 25 employees, and they're making money hand over fist. And guess what? They're still doing shows, and they're doing live events, and they're doing big shows like they did before, that not just streaming events. We're back in the ballroom. And all of a sudden, the model is making money. Now, are there price pressures? Are there things that are changing? Of course there are. There always will be. There's always going to be trends that we have to respond to. So it's been a great learning experience. It's horrible that we had to go through it. But I think the upside on this is that we're going to be a much healthier industry. We're going to be a better value for our customers because we are not selling on price. Selling on price is inherently dishonest, but it just means that I'm going to find ways to cut corners, which are going to be to the detriment of my customer who underpaid me in the first place. It's a very disingenuous relationship between a price shopper and a price seller, where they're both basically lying to themselves, saying, I'm going to pay you enough to do the job. And you're saying, well, I'm going to do the bare minimum to get it done. And the fact is, neither of you are doing what's best for the show. But there's always going to be people out there like that. You don't have to be like that, and not all of your customers are going to be like that either. So there's a lot of things that we've learned from all this. There's some things we had to unlearn. I'm going to talk about those in some future podcasts. But there's a few things I just want to recap that we had to get over right away just to get to where we are right now in 2023 to run a scalable organization. The things that I talk about the most often with management teams and owners is how someone is paid doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they are part-time W-2 on demand, whether they are freelance 1099, freelance outside payroll service, or you're hiring them through a third-party labor provider. None of that matters. It doesn't change whether or not that individual is a professional, will do good work. And it does not matter one iota to the customer. Okay. The value, the other thing we have to get over is the value we create is in planning. We're not selling a show. We're selling what it takes to do a show. Doing shows is actually kind of easy, right? It's the planning is where the value is created. And so we have to shift what we're selling to the planning. What happens up to, unloading the truck at the venue. That's where all the value is actually created. Margin, what things are valuable to customers, is also different, right? The margin on things a customer can price for themselves is going to be inherently low. The margin on things that a customer cannot do or understand or source, that margin is going to be high, right? So we're changing some of our thinking. When they can get online and figure out where to buy the piece of equipment that you're renting to them, they can make a cost analysis for themselves. They can get online, find out where to rent it somewhere else. Rental is not where we make money. Planning is where we make money. Okay. And the other thing that we've learned is that risk without profit is just stupid. We've got to quit doing it. We have to look at what we do, recognize that it's risky. Do not take on overhead to do risky things that people aren't going to pay us a fair price for, and then get on with our lives. If you can do half the business, make 4 times the profit, take home twice the money, okay, why wouldn't you do that? Okay. It's not all about top line growth. It's really, as an owner, it's about bottom line growth. It's about scalability. It's about keeping your stress down. It's about having a decent life, waking up every morning, still liking what you do, being able to take a vacation for a month. All of that matters more than the chains that we built for ourselves about how we were supposed to run these businesses with huge numbers of employees, internal costs, and selling on price. So, to say that this idea of scalability is simple is unfair. It really is. Scalability goes against our instincts. Okay? It challenges common sense. This is actually a pretty big idea. But unfortunately, the devil is in the details. We have a lot to unlearn. We have some new skills to apply. There's some disciplines involved. There's some skill sets that we weren't emphasizing before. Now, my next podcast will cover some of those details, specifically the best practices that are no longer relevant and what we need to do instead, because we've got to replace some things. Okay. So we're going to talk more about that. Guys, as I've said for years, the show will go on. We're going to have fun. We're going to make money doing it. And I thank you for going on this journey with me. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.